We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and you're all going to die down here. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Super Video Game Month, and this week we are talking the 2002 film Resident Evil. My name is Chris Logan, and I'm joined, as always, by my reanimated co-host, Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am. I have, as established previously, not really dived too deep into Resident Evil, so I was curious to step in and see what the fuss was all about.
So before this week, preparing for this episode, never watched a Resident Evil movie, never played a Resident Evil game, never viewed any Resident Evil content. Is that accurate?
Yeah, give or take.
Okay. And, well, I guess we'll talk about your first experience into the Resident Evil world as we go through this episode. Me, personally, and the complete opposite. I've been obsessed with this franchise since day one. It is probably my favorite video game franchise. I played the original game back on PlayStation. Me and my older brother, my dad, I specifically remember renting that game, playing it, us all getting creeped out. I remember my brother throwing the controller down the first time a dog jumps through the window. It was the scariest video game I have ever played. It's, someone approaches it now, that original version, it's been remade and revamped a few times, but if someone plays that original PlayStation version, probably won't seem that scary. Graphics haven't aged too well, but man, it made an impression on me, and I was hooked from the beginning. I was probably, honestly, too young to really be playing them, but didn't stop me. I remember playing the Resident Evil 2 demo when that released, and then finally getting my hands on the actual game, 3, and so on and so forth. I think every main entry in that series is among the best of its generation, except Resident Evil 6. I'm not alone in that that argument, but all the other entries are just absolute bangers. I love it. That being said, I remember this movie being announced and being super hyped because that game, again, it's so atmospheric and cinematic at times in a way I had never seen in a video game before. Like, man, this is going to translate so well to a movie. I even remember the first time I saw this trailer. It was in the movie theaters for the Mothman Prophecies. Andrew, do you remember the Mothman Prophecies? I saw it in theaters. I hardly remember.
Yes,
I want to say
do remember.
Richard Gere. I think it's Richard Gere, right? And he's trying to, look into the Mothman. And to be honest with you, I fell asleep in that movie at some point.
The disrespect to Mothman. My God.
I haven't revisited it. Maybe we'll do just that on this podcast. But I remember seeing the trailer and being like,
I want to say one more thing about the Mothman Prophecies.
Oh, please.
I didn't realize that it had anything to do with the actual Mothman stuff for the longest time. I thought the Mothman...
You thought that was all created for that movie?
I thought the Mothman Prophecies was just Mothman was just some dude who guessed a bunch of stuff was going to happen. I just the Mothman Prophecies all coming true. I guess it's the way they say it. I think Mothman. Yeah, but they said it as one word, so it was the Mothman Prophecies. And I was like, oh, based off of the clear prophecies of George Mothman. Got it. That must be true.
Dr. Mothman?
Dr. Mothman. These are his prophecies. I understand. All right, makes sense.
That's fantastic. I saw this trailer. I freaked out because I recognized like the Umbrella logo and it's Resident Evil. But from the beginning, I was a little perplexed at the tone of that trailer. All this metal music, big over the top action. I remember that kick that Mila Jovovich does off the corner of the room before kicking the dog. That was the big money shot in the trailer, and I was like, what exactly is this? Like, I'm not recognizing these characters, the tone, but I still checked out the movie. And look, #PP, I'm just setting the stage here. That initial viewing back in 2002, I didn't love the movie, although I watched it a lot. It's hard to really kind of reconcile how I know every scene of this movie so well, but didn't really love it back in the day. Like, I had issues with it because it was so different from the video games. I mean, so different. So, revisiting for this podcast, my goal was to watch this movie and really just put the video games out of my mind. They've evolved so much since then. The movies, I know they eventually go their own direction. I mean, it's really its own entity. So that was my headspace going into this. Let's just watch a, hopefully fun, over-the-top action movie from the early 2000s. And boy, is this movie from the early 2000s. You could watch this with zero context and probably like pinpoint the year it released within like 3 years, right? I mean, it is such a specific era.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no question. Like, you can based off of like literally the star, everything, I think you can literally be like, yeah, this movie came out early 2000s, unquestionably. Like, with the music and everything going on, I turned it on and I was watching it, and that was like my first thought. I was like, how 2000s is this?
I mean, the very beginning of this movie, not to jump too far ahead, but like there's text on screen and narration. It's reading you the text. It is so much like the opening of Ghosts of Mars, which also came out in this era, like within a couple of years, right? I mean, it is such a time capsule. And that movie also has like the metal music soundtrack. It's pretty wild.
I'm guessing there was just I don't know. For me personally, again, #PP, a heavy narration to start a movie is always questionable for me, because if your story requires you to give me 3 pages of exposition before I can just watch it, it always kind of gives me pause, because it's like, I don't know, that seems a little much. And it's odd here because like the movie basically repeats the entire intro information throughout the course of the film. So it's kind of like, why'd you do that then? Don't really understand. But it was certainly not alone. And like Ghosts of Mars, I'm an unabashed John Carpenter apologist. But even Ghosts of Mars, I'm like, you explained all of this throughout the course of the film. Like, you don't need to do that. One of the only movies I believe I've ever seen that I was kind of like, yeah, you kind of had to do that, was Green Lantern, for the way they chose to go with that story, where they like chose to go with that path of like establishing all these different things in the way that they do. And I was like,
who could forget, Andrew, the emerald energy of willpower? Did I say it right?
The emerald energy of will. The emerald energy of will. With throwing it way back there, folks, to episode 1. Back when we were young men and the world was ahead of us. But it's unbelievable to me that like it was such a trend though, where like, just you felt the need to explain all this information at the beginning of the film, and then obviously in almost all instances it was unnecessary. Like, the film explained generally everything the intro dialogue gave you, and so it just made it even more questionable. It felt like, and like, I don't know if it was like a Blade Runner thing where like the studio came in, they're like, oh no, you got to do this at the beginning, otherwise the audience is going to be confused. And it's possible, but who knows?
Who knows, Andrew? Before we get into any more specifics about this film, we got to set the stage a little bit here. This movie was released March 15th of 2002. It's made on a budget of $33 million. At the box office, it brings in $103 million. That is successful. We were lamented all the time, the loss of the $30 million movie. This is the kind of movies that are missing in today's landscape. I don't even mean like the quality or content. I just mean you can do some weird stuff for $30 million and still come out profitable. Critically, however, gotta say, it's not well received by critics. It holds just a 36% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Honestly, this isn't even like a remark on the quality of the film, but I'm not surprised. It's a video game movie from the early 2000s. I think we are just now starting to see a little bit of prestige work their way into video game adaptations. Because, superhero movies were like this for a long time. When a superhero movie is coming out, you didn't expect it to be good. X-Men was kind of surprising. Spider-Man, no one could anticipate. You expected Ghost Rider. You expected Batman and Robin. You expected Steel. I mean, you expected this flood of adaptations that are very weak when it comes to translating the source material and aren't a hit with critics. Maybe they make some money. You just don't expect a lot of quality. Of course, we know that's largely changed with superhero movies. They have a much higher standard now. MCU is a big part of that. Looking at video games, I think we're finally maybe getting there. The Fallout TV series is getting rave reviews. People love that show, as well as The Last of Us, which is also a TV show, but prestige TV show. I think these adaptations are finally starting to get taken a little bit seriously and some reverence to the source material. I think a lot of that is just storytelling in video games has also evolved a lot, makes that transition a little bit easier. But I think we're finally moving into a new era with video games. But early 2000s, we were certainly not there yet.
No, I mean, I would say even now, a video game adaptation is still kind of met with a little bit of hesitancy of like, and they're still not all necessarily batting 1,000. Stuff like, the Super Mario Brothers comes to mind of, the critics' response to that was pretty mixed, but audiences loved it and it made a ton of money. And so it's Mario was one of those movies that like even had my friends being like, did the critics not understand? It's a Mario movie. And I was like, well, I always hate when my friends put me in that position to have to like, defend critics because I feel like they really do get a bum rap sometimes. But that was a moment where I was like, well, it's a little bit more than that. But but even now, like I know they just released, I think, a Knuckles show on Paramount Plus from the Sonic movies, and there's a third
world
Sonic,
we live in.
and there's a third Sonic movie coming that we know is going to have Shadow
Voiced by
Keanu Reeves, the man who should be Racer X. But that's what I call Keanu Reeves. That's my only
Racer
name.
X.
The man who
it's not just Racer X. The man
X.
who would be Racer X.
Yes, because he
that.
should have been Racer X. But yeah, so even now there's still hesitancy. Even the Sonic movie, which ended up kind of working out okay, but like largely like the first trailer, like when they made Sonic have like hair and stuff, like fans were like, what? And the outrage was so loud that when they changed it, the studio went back and was like, better fix this. And you can see that as a good or bad thing, but
still hesitancy. I think we're on the eve of a change though. Like the Borderlands movie is coming out, which pretty thin story in those games, but they're massively popular. We know the cast. I don't know if there's a trailer yet.
There is.
Kate Blanchett, Jamie Lee Curtis, Kevin Hart. Like they're getting A-list stars to be in a video game adaptation. That just wasn't always the case.
Oh no, absolutely, that's true. I mean, although how you can't get much higher A-list than Bob Hoskins himself. Dennis Hopper and Bob Hoskins in the Super Mario Brothers movie in '93 is still a very strange statement to say out loud when you really think about it.
It sure is strange, Andrew. I'll agree with that.
What I will say is interesting is that the audience score on this one is a lot higher than I expected it to be. The audience score on this is a 67% based off of 250,000 plus reviews. That is much higher than I was expecting.
I'm surprised and I'm not at the same time. Because
it's nostalgia. You think it's weighted by childhood love of Mila Jovovich and heavy metal music?
I think there's plenty of people like me that love the games first and have a hard time with the movies. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of moviegoers, we're in the minority camp. Plenty of people saw this movie just as another zombie movie, and these movies have taken on a life of their own. So regardless of the quality of this film, I know that they've made 5 or 6 of them now. I think it's finally done, but I think it's a very long franchise. Before we hit record, I was looking at some of the returns, looking at the box office, and for the first few entries, it's all about the same: $30 to $45 million budgets, bringing in 100 to 150, and then like the last 2 or 3, it jumps to like $300 million box office. It really takes off. So looking at it through that lens, just knowing where this franchise goes, there's got to be love for this first one because they keep making them and people keep seeing them.
That is true. I was genuinely curious about that. And yeah, I mean, Resident Evil 4 makes $300 million. Resident Evil 5 makes 240, and Resident Evil 6 makes 314.
Wild.
Now, what I will say, and even to their credit, is the budgets also don't really, like, the first one was made for 33. The highest budget any of these have is 5, which is made for 65 million. So even that 240 at the box office is still basically a ×4 multiplier. And then even 6 is made for 40 and then makes 314 million. The highest grossing installment of this franchise is the 6th installment. This isn't including Welcome to Raccoon City, which my understanding is that's a reboot. But of this original timeline, the most profitable installment is the final entry. Now, what I will caveat that with is the 6th movie makes a whopping $26.8 million in America. The rest of it is all international. And if you look at a lot of these movies, the first movie's pretty evenly split. 40, call it 40 in America, 63 everywhere else. Second one is 51 here, 78 anywhere else. The next one is 50 here, 100 everywhere else. And that's where it kind of starts running away with it. You get to 4 and it's 60 million in the States, 240 internationally. You get to 5.
My guess is China, the Chinese market, wasn't there in the beginning. And
possibly
came in at some point.
And I know the Chinese market is something they're kind of not hoping to rely on now. But yeah, that gap of 4 kind of remains. It's 42 million in America on 5, 198 the rest of the world. And then again, it kind of hits its zenith with the final chapter where it makes 26.8 million here and 287 million internationally. That's for a total of 314 million. That is nuts. It is absolutely like the most successful installment of this franchise is technically the last one, which has got to be an outlier for sure. I don't know that there's any franchise where the last installment is possibly the most successful of all of them. Financially, at least.
I'll be interested to see. That is pretty odd. I love the naming convention of the series because, like, the very next one is Apocalypse. Like, all right, we're talking end of the world stuff here. But a series keeps going because the next one is Extinction. Like, that's the end. There's nothing left. It's Extinction. How do you follow that up?
Yeah.
How do you follow that up? Afterlife. That's how you keep going. The Afterlife. Well, that's got it. Where can you go from there? Retribution. Okay. Sure. How do we end this thing? How do we announce that it's the last one? You call it the final chapter. That's how you finally end that. But like every single one of these is like a final movie type title.
Yeah, it's like
they keep going. They keep making money. Good for them.
Yeah, I did like that where it's like we they're like looking at that like we made a movie called Apocalypse. What do we call the next one? I don't know. Where's the thesaurus, man? Like find something. Like and then just kept going. And then finally we're like whatever. It's like Friday the 13th. I think part 4 is called the final chapter.
The final chapter.
And it's like, whoops.
How you follow that up?
A new beginning. And then how do you follow that up? Jason Lives.
Someone that is not a stranger to video game movies is the writer and director of this film, Paul W.S. Anderson. Alum of the show, Andrew, because this man also directed Mortal Kombat, the 1995 original, as well as Alien vs. Predator, both of which are previous episodes of our very podcast. A few other notable things he's directed, Event Horizon, which is something that we've talked about a few times. I gotta imagine is eventually going to be an episode of our podcast. Death Race, the remake with Jason Statham, and Monster Hunter. So another video game adaptation, also starring Mila Jovovich, also potentially a future episode. Any of his movies could be an episode of our podcast. I believe I didn't look too hard into this. I think all of his movies are certified rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, which I'm sure he's the first one to say, like, I don't make movies for critics or whatever. In a way, it is pretty impressive. He continues to make big movies, Hollywood movies, sometimes high budget movies consistently, and they find their audience. Like, they make money, but has never made a positive reception critically in any of his films. It's you talk about things that are unique, Andrew. There's plenty of directors that have probably never been certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but they usually don't have filmographies that last 3 decades.
Yeah, there's actually a whole section on his Wikipedia of reception, and it has the Rotten Tomatoes score of all of his movies. And he has 3 movies in the 40s, and that's as high as it gets. His highest rated movie is Mortal Kombat at a 47%.
Well, it should be 95%, but
he does have a movie that comes out called Shopping. That is not really got any score or ratings on it. It's before Mortal Kombat. But yeah, otherwise his budgets, it looks like the highest budget he's ever had is possibly his movie Pompeii, which had 100 million, but typically his budgets are around 30 to 60 million. So he keeps his movies a little bit cheaper. And generally speaking, he makes them some money. So he's kind of like Greg Land, comic book artist, who's known for tracing extensively and using what some might say are inappropriate sources for that tracing. But the man gets his stuff in on time.
I don't know if I would agree with some negative connotations.
I'd say it was a perfect analogy.
I think maybe Yui Boll is the Greg Land of filmmakers. I think it might be a little bit more...
That almost feels mean to Greg Land at that point. That's like it flips around so far the other way. Like I'm not a fan of Greg Land, but that's like, oh man, are we going to be that mean to the man?
Maybe Paul W.S. Anderson is Tony S. Daniels. How about that, Andrew?
Well, his last name is Tony Daniel, not Daniel. But that's a little bit more fair. Daniel. Hey, look. It's a name, man. We can get it right. But yeah, sure. That's a little bit better.
Well, with all those weird comparisons out of the way, Andrew, let's just jump into this movie. Everything we like, all the positive, what works in Resident Evil. You ready to do this?
I guess. Yes, Chris. Very ready to do this.
That's all saying it. In a secret underground research and development facility, a deadly virus is released upon the employees. After the AI security system murders everyone to contain the virus, a SWAT team is dispatched to investigate. They meet up with a handful of survivors, but due to the gas that was released, have no memory of what has happened. Once they reach the center of the facility, known as the Hive, they discover the virus has reanimated all of the corpses, and they have a limited time to escape before the doors are locked for good. That synopsis I just read probably goes 30 minutes into this movie, but that's all you need, right? I mean, that's the plot, and then we're just escaping from there, right?
Yeah.
There's very few twists and turns. After that, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about it, but first, we're going to talk about the cast of this film, starting with a high point, the best casting, best performance of the movie, because every episode, we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the Call of Duty that they are actually elevating the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Resident Evil?
Well, Chris, I am glad you asked, as always. But I am going to go...
Didn't see that one coming. Had no idea I was springing this on you.
Yeah, I never know where these shows are going to go now, especially after 150 plus episodes. I'm going to go straight to the top, Chris. I'm going to be going with Mila Jovovich as Alice, our amnesiac protagonist, as my Mark Strong. She is undoubtedly the main character of these films, especially as they go on through the first half of this one. It's a little bit more balanced between the kind of ensemble that we have, but very quickly most of that ensemble is dispatched in various ways, leaving her as kind of the standout of what's left, especially as the amnesiac stuff starts wearing off and she starts kind of embracing her badassness. But it's an interesting spot to sit in as an actor when you've got kind of a character who's not sure who they are, but throughout the course of the film, they have to kind of unlock that. And I think she's up to that task. I mean, obviously, Mila Jovovich is known to many, dare I say, primarily as Lilu from Fifth Element. I would say that might be the most common thing that she's known for amongst people. I guess she is also in Dazed and Confused. She's in a bunch of stuff, to be fair. She's Mildred Harris in Chaplin. She's
alum of the show for her role in Hellboy.
Yes.
David Harbour Hellboy.
Yes. Also was Katinka in Zoolander, for all of the Zoolander fans out there, which was the year before this. So you got to imagine that was a big part in her getting the Resident Evil gig was Zoolander. But
Sure.
Joan of Arc also in the Joan of Arc movie that Luke Besson made for some reason. What a strange...
That one was big. That one was big for me. I saw The Messenger and Fifth Element a number of times before seeing this movie. I definitely knew who Mila was because of those two movies.
Yeah, and so anyway, she's, entering into this. I would say I would actually say that her casting, people probably would have been kind of on board with that. Basically, she was in a lot of stuff that we kind of grew up liking, but and then becomes kind of the face of this franchise. I mean, she is the lead actress across all these films, playing a character that is not from the games. I don't know if they ever worked this character into the games. I don't think so. But I've not played the game, so I don't know.
Not any main game. I can tell you that.
So anyway, I think she's up to the task of what she needs to do here. She obviously is tough. She can beat stuff up and look extremely convincing while doing it. And yeah, it works, I think.
It's a good pick, Andrew. Not to immediately sound backhanded, but she is maybe the only character in this movie with an arc. I mean,
yes.
I guess the other character, the Amnesia, kind of does, but theirs is really just remembering who they are. She not only remembers who she is, but she doubles down on her convictions. She becomes more badass in the action department. She's not exactly damsel in distress, but she's not stepping up too much in the beginning, and by the end, she's doing these kicks off the wall and taking people out and shooting 10 dogs and whatever else.
It's pretty sweet.
She comes a long way in that regard. I think this is the great pick. I mean, probably what was I, 12 when this came out? 13-year-old Chris would definitely be agreeing with the Mark Strong Award. I text you not to get too horny on Maine, but I started this movie. I was like, oh yeah, I think maybe I realized why I watched this movie so many times, even though I told myself I didn't like it. Mila Jovovich is naked in like all of her movies. I don't know. Maybe that's why I saw her early movies.
I mean,
so
Fifth
many
Element
times.
for sure. This one, yeah, it's a. It is. I think she was formative for a lot of youth there.
Certainly for me, Andrew. But my Mark Strong Award's going to go to somebody else. I'm going to give my Mark Strong Award to Michelle Rodriguez as the character of Rain. Another actor that I have very much enjoyed for the past 20 years. And this was, I guess, Fast and Furious came out same year before. This is maybe this and Fast and Furious are the two movies that like introduced me to Michelle Rodriguez. And she's played similar roles for the past 20 years, and I enjoy it every time it comes up. I think she's very good at it. I think she's a very believable badass, unlike Mila Jovovich's character that kind of has this arc of becoming a badass. She's taken no crap from the very beginning. She's kind of a hothead. I'm giving her the Mark Strong Award because I think she has undeniable charisma and likability, and the character of Mila Jovovich's character and the character of Spence, we'll talk about, also has amnesia. It takes them a while to get going, and this movie is not too deep with the characters, and I don't even mean that as a slap to the movie, but that's not really what it's going for. These are a lot of one-note commandos, makes up half of our cast, but I think she just has a natural ability that you remember her after this movie. Again, I'm trying not to put a diss with every compliment I give, but the other commando type characters, I don't remember much about them. I don't think that's cast list.
I don't think that's backhanded. I think that's by design largely. I mean, like I said, several of those commandos are taken out pretty unceremoniously 30 minutes into this movie.
Sure, yeah.
You lose 4 of them in one go. And when there's characters that are like that, it's, the focus here to me clearly is Alice, Spence, Rain, and I guess Addison, maybe he's the last, Matt, the fourth, maybe the other one who's kind of with them for a while, but a lot of the rest of these people are disposed of pretty quickly. And so I don't think it's that strange that she's kind of one of the few standouts. It feels to me like it's mostly by design. And
but I would say I don't think it's because they gave her interesting character stuff. I think it's all Michelle Rodriguez.
Pure spite. Got it.
Riz, if you will. Just who she is. It's
as the kids say.
It's something that she's bringing to the role is what I'm saying. So for that very specific reason, I'm giving her the Mark Strong Award. And just while we're giving out our 2 Mark Strong Awards to Mila Jovovich and Michelle Rodriguez, I think it's very cool that the 2 stars of this movie are women. The Resident Evil video game franchise has had at least a female lead. Joe Valentine's the lead of the first game, but she's also alongside Chris Redfield.
Those are names.
Resident Evil 2 is also a man and a woman. But the fact that this is very straightforward, a lot of the posters are literally just Mila Jovovich and Michelle Rodriguez, or just Mila Jovovich. But it's these 2 women at the forefront of this horror action franchise. And I think that's pretty cool. And they should get some credit for that.
It's about time.
2002 was about time.
It's about time that video game movies remembered women exist. I'm curious. This is a bit of a rabbit hole. Do you think if this movie came out now, people would say it was woke?
1000%. Especially if they have an established video game franchise, but they make new characters and those characters are women. Yeah, people would have their...
You know what other movie would 100% be called woke today, Chris?
Alien. Yeah.
Also, probably Terminator 2.
We can get out of this rabbit hole. We've been here.
It's fine. Just stood out to me. Because I know you mentioned those names that were definitely people's names. And from the games. And I do remember reading that George Romero was going to make a Resident Evil movie at one point, which maybe a little too on the nose. But I guess at the end of the day, if you're going to go with a guy that's known for making zombie adjacent stuff, go to the master. But
I remember hearing about this a long time, back in I think I read it in a video game magazine.
Because
that seems perfect, just with the tone of the video games and a very definitely on the nose. But I remember reading that George A. Romero, who must have been in his late 60s, 70s. I mean, he was already pretty old. He had his assistant play through the entirety of the game and record it, and then he watched the recording. Is how he got the story of that first game. Which
he was, I think. I think he was in his late 50s. I think he was born in 40s. So
okay, not quite as old as I expected, but maybe a little. A little. He apparently had
probably. He had made a commercial for Resident Evil 2, apparently, that was only shown in Japan. And apparently it impressed people so much, they were kind of like, hey, why don't you make a movie out of this? So he largely adapted Resident Evil 1, the game, into a movie. And apparently his ending is supposedly was based off of the quote unquote best ending of the game, because I guess that game has several different endings, which
This is
that's
correct.
pretty cool. So yeah, apparently he wrote he did work with wow, there was another writer he worked with. I can't remember, but he apparently worked on several drafts of that film. Like, not a small amount of work by George Romero went into a Resident Evil movie.
Yeah.
And we're talking 5 or 6 drafts. It's kind of wild. And then I'm trying to remember who it was that was supposed to work with him on that. But
Well, definitely
yeah.
a lot of work went into it, and apparently we're going to get all of these answers very soon, because there is a film, a documentary called George A. Romero's Resident Evil that is set to be released sometime soon. There's no official release date, but it has been announced. There was a teaser trailer released in March of 2023. So I'm not sure what the delay is in actually getting this thing out there, but it seems to be on its way at some point. So I'd be very interested to see what direction he would have taken it. I suspect it would be closer to the feel of that video game that I loved in the late 90s. And so I can't wait to see this thing and see what his vision was going to be.
It's kind of interesting because, and apparently he hired Bernie Wrightson to do designs for the film, which,
well, that's awesome.
Yeah, Bernie Wrightson, legendary comic book artist for those who don't know, known for doing tons of horror stuff. Primarily Swamp Thing is what he's known for. He also did a very, very tremendously illustrated adaptation of Frankenstein once upon a time. Also did that Batman story with Jim Starlin. Was it Bad Blood? No,
it's the Cult.
The Cult, yes. Sorry, Batman Bad Blood is something else entirely. But the Cult, that's also amazing. Batman the Cult, if you haven't read it, is awesome.
One of the very few good Jason Todd stories. Jason Todd as Robin stories.
Of which Jim Starlin actually wrote several, because Jim Starlin actually writes Death in the Family too. Jim Starlin, for those of you who don't know, is the co-creator of a little character called Thanos. But it's interesting to look back at that, because I do think Romero's history with Resident Evil has not been explored in a general sense too heavily. They made a documentary that was about Kevin Smith's Superman and what happened with it after Kevin Smith did that tell-all explaining it, explaining what happened. And so it always felt weird to me that they went back and were we're going to make a documentary about Kevin Smith's Superman. And I was like, don't we already kind of know what happened with Kevin Smith's Superman? And they did it. Somebody worked on another one for George Miller's Justice League, even though, again, the trials and tribulations of George Miller's Justice League are pretty well known at this point. So this one actually is interesting to me because it feels like it's a story we don't know all the answers for. And there's a lot of information there. I actually did look it up. His script is out there. George Romero's Resident Evil scripts can be found. I actually downloaded one right before we did this. If I were smarter and used my time more wisely, I would have read it before recording this. But I also would have had no frame of reference for how good of an adaptation it is, because I've not played Resident Evil 1. But yeah, just a cool thing. Anyway, back to the cast.
Well, next, Andrew, we have Eric Mabius playing the character of Matt. This is a bit of another mysterious character. This is when Alice comes to in the mansion, she has no memory of what has happened. This is the first person that she meets who, it says he's a cop that's new to the force. The SWAT team shows up. They're questioning him. He's like, well, I just got transferred. You're not going to find me. As the story unfolds, we realize a little bit more to this guy. He is actually there looking for his sister, and we learn that his sister works in the Hive, and she and him together were going to expose what Umbrella was secretly doing here, creating these bioweapons. Now, what's interesting about this character, Andrew, before we get into this performance and everything, is that the character of Chris Redfield is a cop in Resident Evil 1. In Resident Evil 2, his sister, Claire, comes to Raccoon City looking for him. So we have a sibling looking for their sibling in Raccoon City. And then also in Resident Evil 2, we have the character of Leon Kennedy, who is a rookie on the police force, and it's his first day on the job. So you kind of combine those two stories, and you get a whole new character with Eric Mabius playing this character of Matt. Now, of course, 20 years ago, Andrew, I was very upset about this, but now I'm an older, wiser man, and I'm just going to enjoy this character for what he is, and not think about what we could have had by actually adapting one of the characters from the video game.
You could have just said you're still upset. You're allowed to still be upset later.
No, Andrew. Hashtag PP. I'm fine. It doesn't bother me at all. Make up new characters. Why not? It's not Eric Mabius' fault. He's doing the best that he can. I do like this story because this isn't a complicated story. I did that quick synopsis. They're in the hive. They have a limited time to get out. There's a bunch of zombies. That's all you need. There's this little bit of intrigue as far as we know someone sabotaged the facility. We know someone let the virus out. Why exactly did they do that? That's the little bit of breadcrumbs we get throughout. It's not very deep. It's just enough there to kind of keep us interested in some kind of plot. But he's definitely one of the characters at the center of that. He is the only character that you kind of feel like is 100% a good guy. By the end, you kind of feel good about Alice as well. But there's definitely times when you think she might have been part of the problem before. But this guy seems to be trying to do the right thing and take an umbrella down.
Yeah, I mean, it's accurate. Like you said, Alice ends up being the protagonist of the rest of these films, kind of working against Umbrella going forward. Is the end of this movie just the beginning of 28 Days Later?
28 days later, so we wake up and 100%.
All right.
Or The Walking Dead, beginning of The Walking Dead. I mean, it's
which
a zombie
is also
thing,
just
Andrew.
the beginning of 28 Days Later.
28 days later, yes, exactly.
It all comes back to 28 Days Later, is what I'm saying. Which
What came out first? 'Cause that's pretty close proximity. When did 28 Days Later come out?
It's a good question.
There was we had this good 10-year run of
it's the same.
zombie
It's the
resurgence.
same year, actually.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
That is extremely interesting. It technically comes out after. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. I'm not going to say Alex Garland ripped off the Resident Evil movie when he wrote 28 Days Later, folks, but I'm just saying. I'm not saying it. That's interesting. Yeah, it comes out 28 Days Later is November 2002 in United Kingdom and Ireland, and then June 2003 in the United States. It actually might have been released later over here because of Resident Evil, honestly. Because Resident Evil is March 2002 here, so I could very much have seen that being why it was delayed.
James Purefoy plays Spence Parks. Now, this is another character with amnesia. Early on, we kind of realize from Mila Jovovich's character having some flashbacks and memories that they were perhaps romantically involved. There's a wedding picture of them, but we don't know much beyond that. But we probably know this guy is going to end up being a bad guy because look at him. Look at James Purefoy. He looks like a bad guy. It's maybe not as extreme. It's not quite Rufus Sewell levels that we talked about recently on the podcast. Why were we talking about Rufus Sewell? What was he in that we talked about, Andrew?
That's a great question, Chris, because there's absolutely no way to check.
Oh, God, we're so old.
It's not
Our memories
old. He wasn't
are failing
old.
us. He's
the illusionist. He's in the illusionist.
There we go. Bad guy in the illusionist. Thank you so much.
Yes,
and I mentioned there talking about him. He is just destined to always play bad guys because look at him. James Purefoy, very similar. He just looks. You don't trust him, Andrew, and you're right to not trust him. He's the one that sets this whole thing in motion. He releases the virus. He plans on selling it on the open market and make a lot of money. Bad man. Very bad.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly looks bad. He's that guy that, like, it reminds me a little bit. Stick with me if you will. Our good not friend Patrick Willems does a video on Alien Covenant and why he thought it was awesome, which is a great video that explains why I also think Alien Covenant is awesome. But he talks about a twist in that movie. Hey, Chris, have you seen Alien Covenant?
I have.
Okay. So he talks about the reveal late in the movie that David... And he talks about how
Andrew, you didn't ask all of our listeners if they have seen Alien Covenant. I appreciate you
Too
running
freaking
it by
bad.
me. But...
Well, okay, cut it out. Bleep all that. I will specify now. Spoilers for Alien Covenant, folks. If you have not seen Alien Covenant, tune away. Sorry about the high-pitched static you heard just a moment ago. But anyway, he talks about this idea that at a certain point, like the minute you see that David and Walter look exactly the same, you know what's going to happen. Like there is no question that these guys are going to switch places at one point because David is going to kill Walter and take his place. Or dispatch Walter and take his place. They're androids. Can you kill androids? Yes, you can. We saw Blade Runner. But it's this thing that kind of got lambasted where people were like, oh, well, it was so obvious. And it's like, it was supposed to be obvious. It was never supposed to be something that you were like, that was me being like audibly shocked that something had happened. It was never meant to be a twist that you were like thrown off by. It's more that thing you're waiting to happen. And so it was always a little interesting to see reviews that were just like, and David switching places with Walter was so painfully obvious. It's supposed to be painfully obvious. It's not supposed to be secret. So with Purefoy here, I get a very similar vibe. Like you're just waiting. It's not a twist that this guy's a bad guy. You're just waiting for the reveal that, yeah, he's bad. And then it comes. So it's another thing where it's like, oh, she was trying to take him down, but he wasn't. And it's like, yeah, that's not a twist. The dude's sketchy the whole movie. Like it's, what's he telling? What's his story? You know what? I don't care what his story is because he's bad. It's his fault. All of this happens.
It is his fault, Andrew. And
screw him.
I'm sorry. While you were going on that spiel, I was rereading part of his Wikipedia article over and over again, trying to wrap my head around it. Andrew, tell me if this sounds right, okay? It says that he had an uncredited role as V in the 2006 film V for Vendetta, but it was dubbed over by Hugo Weaving. And it says he was cast in a main role as Captain Gulliver Troy / Captain Blighty in the 2020/21 second and 2022 third season of the television series Pennyworth, the prequel to both Gotham and V for Vendetta. He played a character on Pennyworth, and the show Pennyworth is a prequel to Gotham and V for Vendetta.
Yes.
What, Andrew? What?
So obviously Pennyworth is simply about Alfred. That's how it's a prequel to Gotham. Like that's all that means.
Yeah, that's
an easy enough.
Where does V for Vendetta come in here?
So I remember in hearing about this when this was happening, when there was starting to be these rumors that Pennyworth was going to somehow tie into V for Vendetta. And it is
V for Vendetta, the Alan Moore story that has nothing to do with Batman.
Yes. No, it has absolutely nothing to do with it. Now, I don't really know how it all comes together. I'll be honest with you. I just remember hearing that it would. And so what
a weird thing.
I'm guessing, hold on. So he's Captain Gulliver Troy, but he's Captain Blighty. So I'm guessing the thing is that Captain Blighty is probably part of the same program that nets us V. Like, if you follow what I'm saying there. Because, like, V is the result of a government program, right? If I'm remembering correctly.
I don't know. I don't think we need to go down this rabbit hole right now. Did V for Vendetta take place in, like, the 1800s or something?
No.
Like, no?
I don't think so. No. Now, the problem...
Like a period.
I don't think so. It says the near future, yeah.
It says 1990s.
Yeah, the near future. Now the problem is that the future of V for Vendetta is a dystopic near future where a fascist totalitarian regime leads Britain, And my understanding is that's not what's happening to the UK in Gotham, but maybe it's designed that it's Pennyworth, then Gotham, then V for Vendetta. I don't know. But, well, maybe I have to go watch Pennyworth now.
Heck
I don't
of
know.
a thing, Andrew. Heck of a
Heck of a
man.
thing.
Andrew, let's talk about Colin Salmon. He
Again.
plays James One Shade. He is one of my favorite things this movie does. We just talked about this last week with Rampage, just something very similar. He's introduced as the leader of the SWAT team, this badass guy, no nonsense. He's got that, like, dare I say, iconic voice. It's cool. Man in charge, right? He's leading the charge into the hive to find out what's going on. And probably 30 minutes in this movie, he's brutally killed.
Brutally.
It is very fun scene.
Yeah,
And
gnarly.
you don't see it coming. I mean, you think he's going to be literally possibly the lead of this movie, and then he is gone. And it's like, wow, nobody's safe. Where do we go from here? I really like when movies are able to pull that off. This is one of my favorite examples of that. Alum of the show. We talked about this man back on Die Another Day, right? Did I get the right James Bond movie that we covered?
No, yes. No, he's not in Die Another Day. He is in Die Another
sure?
Day. So we do,
Yeah.
which comes out the same year as this, actually. He's
Cool.
just also in Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough. So I was getting a little confused there. He's also an alum of the show from Punisher Warzone.
Oh, right. Yeah, he's the cop. Yeah,
He
yeah.
is Agent Paul Budiansky. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, he's. It's kind of shocking when he just kind of is Swiss cheesed.
This is, I guess we'll we'll save it. Definitely can talk about that in scene. So
Yeah,
I'll save all my
but,
thoughts on that scene. But
I will be talking about it very soon. So, yeah, it's pretty gnarly. But yeah, because like you said, you feel like he's kind of setting himself up to be the lead, and then before you know it, he's out, and a lot of these characters are out, and then we kind of focus back to this, like, to borrow a hockey term, the core four, as it were: Alice, Rain, Matt, and Spence. But yeah. But I mean, he's doing exactly what he needs to be doing in that moment. He kind of takes charge of the whole situation right at the beginning. He has a plan, and of course, plans rarely go as intended in Raccoon City. Sure. All right.
I think the last cast member we can talk about is Martin Cruz. He is also part of the SWAT team. He is really in charge of, like, the security systems and getting through the code padlock door and stuff. He seems the most terrified of what's going on, justifiably. It's a
It's
scary
to say.
situation.
Extremely
He gets-
justifiably.
He gets the zombie trope scene where he sacrifices himself so the other survivors can get away. Even though he doesn't actually die at that scene, he lives a little bit longer and then dies. But good stuff. He's good at being scared. Seems like a good, likable guy.
Agreed. Yeah. No notes.
Okay, can we talk about the scene now?
Yeah.
I want to make sure we cover everybody. Just to set this up, we're going to talk about the scenes of this movie, specifically our favorite scenes and the best scene, starting with a high point, our personal favorite scene of the film. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene in Resident Evil?
It's when Colin Salmon gets Swiss cheese. Like, it's
When Colin Salmon
it's-
gets Swiss cheese. That's right,
I
yeah.
guess Swiss cheese is the right word. I don't even know what it is because he doesn't get holes blown in him. He just gets cubed. He gets like meat
My
grinders.
note
like,
is just cubes in all
cubes.
caps.
Anyway, I actually think this is a really interesting scene. Because it does establish that one, things are not what they seem here. But two, it also shows that we're not really playing by any kind of established set of rules. So the setup here is that we are infiltrating this facility called the Hive. Correct me if I'm wrong at any point while speaking about this. So the movie is it has this interesting start where, like, Mila Jovovich is amnesiac. We don't really know what the deal is. This guy Matt comes in, tries to save her, and then basically this mansion gets swarmed by this special Black Forces Ops SEAL team 6. And it's it is it's and then at that point they go through this secret entrance into the Hive, which the mansion, of course, had a secret train that leads you directly to the Hive. Because why wouldn't it?
Of course.
And the intention is to kind of disable the Red Queen, which is this AI that's kind of in charge of this. And it's a classic. They're using a lot of kind of hallmark AI tropes here. Like you got the red lights on the cameras that indicate when it's on. It's a very HAL 9000 type thing to kind of have that clear visual indicator, especially a red light. But
they're going to use electrical impulses to take it out.
They're going to use an EMP. This is just small soldiers. Yeah. So as they're trying to break into this kind of computer core to do this, Red Queen basically says, "Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?" And just starts like that's a group of, I think it's 4 of them go in, just closes all the doors, and then it's Spence, Addison, and a couple of others that are outside trying to open the door back up, but then these lasers start cutting through and it kills off one of them, cuts off the fingers of another one in the same go, slices through somebody else, and then ultimately Colin Salmon's character, One, is literally cubed. Like he's about to jump past the one, but then it like spreads into a grid, and it just slides right there. Like it's this whole timing thing where you think they're gonna get it in time, but like at the same time you watch it go right through him, so like they didn't save him. There's no question that this man just got cubed, and it's kind of like whoa. And then it's brutal, it's gnarly. They don't really show too much of his cubes falling apart. You just kind of see the start of it with like his eye melting and stuff. It's really gnarly. Yeah,
that detail is so cool. The white of his eye starts drooping
out,
so
and it's
gross.
like it's so nasty and maybe atomically correct. I don't know what happens if you cut an eye in half, but with a laser no less. But this is brutal. And this is the moment where watching the movie where I was like, whoa, we're not all on the same playing field here. And then obviously they get the door open immediately, and immediately after he's dead, and they're able to sort of complete this mission. But again, not before establishing that Red Queen is not to be messed with.
It's a memorable scene. It might be the legacy of this film, to be honest with you, because I've seen this. This is the first time I recall seeing this effect in movies, but it's been replicated so many times. The effect being a person gets cut, sliced with something, and then they hold together for a few seconds before that body part falling off. It happens here. It happens in Final Destination 2. It happens in Equilibrium. It happens in, I think, maybe Predators does it. It happens in a lot of movies. With a laser, it kind of, none of it makes sense, but it kind of makes sense. Could you imagine how microscopic that cut can be? But the sword, I mean, come on, the blade is separating the two. It doesn't matter. I've seen this effect a ton of times. This is the first time I remember seeing it.
Happens to Kill Bill too, doesn't it? But it's a sword, not a laser. Isn't that what happens to Lucy Liu?
I think her scalp immediately flies through the air. Does it hold there for a second?
I think it holds, and then it slides off. I don't remember. Because that's my only caveat there, is I think samurai films might have been doing that beforehand, but it was just swords. I don't know if it's lasers, but it is a thing that definitely like kicked off and was like a very big thing for a while, where you'd have like they get sliced by some means, and then like slow realization that like the body part falls off. And this is definitely an early example, and also definitely a very brutal example.
Yeah, I mean, it's very graphic, of course, but also, like we said, when he's cubed and he actually starts falling apart, it's in the foreground, out of focus. You only see like a quarter of his face, but it's enough that you can imagine what is happening. And you see like in the reflection of the door, you see his body just turning into sushi on the ground. It's pretty cool. It's fun. This scene is kind of the key to this whole movie, Andrew, because you're seeing something objectively gross and brutal happen, but you're laughing and having a good time. The movie's having fun with it. Like the guy before him that gets cut, the laser's coming close to the ground, so he jumps in the air and the laser jumps up and cuts him through the torso. Like it literally feels like a video game quick time event, which the video games would adapt this very scene in Resident Evil 4, which releases a couple years after this as a quick time event, escaping the lasers. But also,
Brutal.
here's the thing, Andrew. Here's the thing.
There's a thing.
This super advanced AI, its goal is to kill these people in this hallway before they can get to her and disable her. Why doesn't it just do the grid right away? Why toy with them? Why do the single lasers? You can't look in the movie for the answer, because the answer is
It looks cool.
it looks cool and it's more fun that way. That's it. That's it. There's no
It's
eternal logic
the rule
to
of
it.
cool, man. Doesn't
That's
matter as
why
long
I
as it
think
looks cool.
this is the key of what this movie is going for. There's another scene earlier in the movie, in the very beginning, where we're seeing the lockdown first happen, where there's people trapped on an elevator, and a woman's trying to climb out. Her head is stuck in the doors. The elevator drops, and then it stops dropping right before she gets decapitated. And then the elevator shoots up. It cuts her head off. Again, why would the AI do that? Why is it teasing her? Why is it... Because it's cool. Because it's more exciting, and that's all that matters. And that's the energy that flows through this movie. It's not a thinker, but it's not trying to be a thinker. Like it's pretty.
It knows what it
level.
is. It knows what it
It
is. I would
100%
say that.
knows
I
what
would
it
say
is,
Paul
yeah.
because Paul W.S. Anderson. I don't know if we mentioned that he writes the script for this as well. Something he would later come to
Yeah.
do with almost all of his movies. Mortal Kombat is like one of the exceptions. Largely, he writes almost everything he directs, which good for him. It is an interesting thing too, because you watch something like 2001, which is still for many like the hallmark of evil AI movies. Because it's all disembodied. Like even this movie gives like a form of sorts to the Red Queen. 2001, you're basically just watching this computer slowly kill these people. And sometimes not even slowly. But it is very direct in its actions. It's not really toying with them for the most part. Now, what I like to imagine is that the AI was getting very frustrated at shoddy construction shit. Like, it was trying to decapitate the person on the first try with the elevator, but the brakes kicked in and didn't fail like they were supposed to. And so she's like, well, fine, I'll send it the other way. Like, the lasers, it was like, it hit the grid button first, but it didn't work. And it was like, well, all I could do is move it. The Red Queen is just sitting there like, you can't get good help anymore. Nobody builds things properly anymore. But, at the end of the day, all it is quite simply, it creates more tension and it looks cooler. Like the elevator is just to create tension. You know what's going to happen the minute she's stuck in that elevator. Again, you're talking about not being a surprise, just being the result of what you expect or what you know is going to happen. The minute she goes through that elevator and gets stuck, you know what's going to happen. And it's all just delays until it does. There is no question that it is ultimately just going to be her getting her head cut off. It's a lot of different steps to get there. Ratchets up the tension, but that's all it ever is.
Over in our Discord, we had some folks drop their positive thoughts on this film. And if you want to do the same for our upcoming movies we're covering, you can do just that. Hop into our Discord server. There's a link in the show notes. But here we have a comment left by Phil Zilla the Asian, who says, I appreciate them going for an original story that still hits a lot of the same beats of the games. Also, the first movie had Marilyn Manson contribute to the score, which gave it an eerie feel that I was into. Interesting and good point. Now, I knew Marilyn Manson did the score, or I think it works with a composer on the score. In fact, I remember, again, I watched this movie a lot back in the day. I must have had the DVD, because I remember watching like special features, and Marilyn Manson talked about the score, and he said this really dumb thing, which I can say this because screw that guy. We don't need to be a positivity podcast for him.
Yeah.
He was like, there's certain sounds you can play that'll like drive a dog like crazy, and humans have like their same frequencies that will like freak out humans, and I snuck some of those into the score. I was like, dude, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But I think of that every time, like I watch this movie or this. I'm like,
they say it's always the ones you least suspect. Sometimes it's the ones you medium suspect. because they've always been that guy. And I know, like, yeah, I don't have anything positive to say about Marilyn Manson, but that statement alone, I would literally have used that as my, anytime somebody was like, dude, what do you think about Marilyn Manson? I would be like, watch this clip. That's exactly what I think about him. Like, that would sum up in like one bit how I've always kind of felt about Marilyn Manson. Like, for years, I know, like, again, we don't have to go too deep on it, but like, I knew a lot of people who were a big fan of the guy because of like the way he tried to like reach out and kind of bring awareness to something. And then you find out the dude's just a monster, like, everybody claimed he was. But it's and he probably still has all of his ribs, but I can't stand anything about that statement you just said, and it sounds horrible to me.
It's lived rent free in my head for a long time. Glad I got to share it with everybody. We also got this comment from Groffles, trapped in green hell. That's his screen name, the whole thing.
That's
Groffles says, Mark Strong Award going to Mila Jovovich, but very close race with Michelle Rodriguez. Those are some excellent picks, Groffles.
They are indeed.
I like how Jovovich goes through a character change from incapable damsel in distress archetype to badass action hero capable of extreme feats. I really enjoyed the movie when it released, and I think it has held up considering the material and how it presents it overall. There's lots of mystery with the plot and a breadcrumb trail to follow. Also, from what I understand, a great homage to the video game content, and at the time, I believe the most successful transmedia content from video games to movies. I haven't fact-checked that, but that might be the case. It was part of the wonderful zombie cultural zeitgeist, but had a unique feel. Plus, Mila Jovovich. It's italicized. Strong, beautiful woman. Yes, please. Okay, hey.
Easy.
Hey,
this is a family show.
But good point here. I've expressed how I feel about the relationship with the games, but I think it is interesting. Zombie cultural zeitgeist, but has a unique feel. I think this is a little unique in the zombie genre, especially that Renaissance area we had. That I really feel like the Resident Evil games really kicked it off. But early 2000s, you get this. You get 28 Days Later. You get the Dawn of the Dead remake. Zombieland comes out a few years after that. I mean, there was this period of time where zombies were really in World War Z. That's kind of the tail end.
Walking
of that.
Dead is kind of the
yeah,
peak
definitely.
of that, arguably, between the comic and the movie. It's interesting calling it a transmedia content too, because I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, Chris.
From context here, I just assumed adapting a story from one media to another.
It's typically content told over multiple mediums. Like, there's, in this case, you have a story that's unfolding through the games, a story
like
that unfolds
the
through the
Matrix
movies.
had a video game that related to part 2.
Another one that's kind of pointed out to a lot like this is Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim has the original kind of manga-sized graphic novels. There's the movie. There's even the beat-em-up game, and then the later television show, all kind of telling slightly different versions of essentially the same story, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by design, sometimes just by coincidence. So it's actually a very interesting concept, because Matrix is another great example of something that even between, like, you look at the video game, you look at stuff like the Animatrix, like, those are different sort of mediums. The Animatrix obviously are, like, segments of viewable content, films, whatever you want to call them, short films, however, but obviously presented in a much different way than the kind of core films. And Resident Evil is interesting in that regard, because I've never really heard it called that before. Because it feels like they're telling very different stories, but it is all sort of still under the umbrella of Resident Evil. And
Pretty good.
But it is an interesting thing to look into, the idea of, franchises that have like transmedia narratives. Like, you could argue something like, say, Superman arguably has a transmedia narrative, because there are so many different versions of Superman out there, told through different mediums, including some rather terrible video games. I'm looking at you, Superman 64. You ever played Superman 64, Chris?
I did. I rented it back in the day. Me and my brother, we were hyped. Couldn't fly through the stupid rings, and we returned it to Blockbuster.
I can't think of a time where my hype versus my delivery was worse as a child. As an adult, it's all the time, but as a kid, it was terrible. But it is interesting. And then obviously, yeah, that 2000s, like you said, cultural zeitgeist of zombies. I think it definitely hits the peak with Walking Dead, because I mean, Walking Dead was just a massive, massive television show. The comic became huge in comic circles. Some of those like the 100th issue, the 150th issue, those were some of the highest selling issues the months they came out, with like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of copies. I think Walking Dead 100 might be the third or fourth highest selling comic ever. I think it's over 1 million copies. And Resident Evil is definitely part of that, because you obviously have the original zombie run of like guys like George Romero, of Night of the Living Dead, the original Dawn of the Dead, the original Day of the Dead, stuff like that in the 70s and the 80s. And then Resident Evil kind of kicks off this. I don't know I don't know if it's a differentiation of the idea of like, the zombies being the result of like evil corporations. Because like Night of the Living Dead and even Dawn of the Dead don't really jump into how necessarily. Dawn of the Dead maybe a little bit, if memory serves, but
no, but there's always a metaphor though. I think zombies,
with the zombie movies, there was a metaphor, but the why of it is never really explained. And it feels like things like Resident Evil, and later even 28 Days Later, stuff like that, were the movies that kind of really tapped into that idea of I was going to say corporate, but I can't really do that. The idea of like, evil corporations, also biological, like experimentation reasons for why the zombies appear. And it is definitely something that was a trend there for a while. The idea of kind of the zombies brought on by the biological, chemical experimentation stuff. And that's something that feels like it's really crystallized in Resident Evil.
Corporation bad, Andrew.
I mean, I get it. I mean, Dawn of the Dead told us that years ago.
But getting back to like the unique feel, this stands out because it's almost like, I don't know, it's like there's not always zombies on screen, and like every time they come on screen, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a zombie movie. Like there's this other threat here, because you have like the AI stuff going on and just escaping in the time limit, and then every now and then zombies rear their ugly head. Like they're almost not even the primary antagonists of the story, but they are a threat in the background. And also we have the setting of like a sterile lab gone awry, but we have what I think are pretty classic looking zombies. A lot of zombie movies, especially after this, are constantly trying to reinvent the zombie, the fast zombie, the specific looks of the zombies, whatever. But here we have a pretty traditional, like gray skinned zombie, dressed how they were dressed when they died. They definitely use CG for some of the effects, like taking out half a head or whatever that they could have done previously. But otherwise, we have pretty classic zombies. I love the zombie sounds. I think these are just pretty good looking zombies. I like it, but putting them in this setting gives us a pretty unique feel that I can't say we saw before this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's definitely some attempts here. Work is being done to kind of try to make some of it seem a little bit different than what came before. And, respect.
Now, Andrew, the big, big bad of this movie is a creature that I know as a licker. That's what they're referred to as in the video games. They debuted in Resident Evil 2. It's a creature that crawls on all fours, seemingly has no flesh, exposed muscle and brain, and a very long tongue, no eyes.
Lord Zed, got it.
Yeah, actually, it's a great comparison. I don't think the movie really explains him much, other than, they were doing some weird stuff down here, and it escapes. But it's a bioweapon that was created by Umbrella. It's kind of what they do. They mess with genetics, create these organic weapons, and they usually escape and kill innocent people. What'd you think of this thing, Andrew?
Okay.
I imagine this is one of those things where, like, I think, the video game context, you see, like, oh yeah, it's that thing, it's the monster, but without it, it kind of feels out of nowhere. Hashtag PP, that the quote unquote boss of a zombie movie is this creature that was clearly not human at any point. And boy, talking about being able to nail down the release of this movie is definitely 2002. Look, hashtag PP, but that CG I don't think was impressive in 2002. Like, this is the same era of, like, Daredevil and The Matrix Reloaded. All movies I saw in theaters at that time as a young child in 2002. I'm watching it and I'm like, guys, this doesn't look good. Like, there's no way. Like, we jumped into the full CG thing way too early in Hollywood. Because it's not that it hasn't aged well, it's that computers weren't capable of doing this yet. I don't know what we were doing in those few years, but it was like 2000, 2005, very specific time period. We went a little overboard.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. We definitely it's something that definitely stands out when you watch some of these movies, just how hard they tried to use CG when the technology just wasn't quite there. I mean, we watched it's definitely something that, like, say, watching Matrix Revolutions.
There's a third one.
The third one, yes. Like that fight with Smith and Keanu. Like, there's CG there that I think just doesn't quite land because it's just not quite there. Not nearly as egregious, I think, as something like, say, this hashtag PP. But a lot of those early 2000s movies were really trying to use that CG to do a lot of heavy lifting that it wasn't quite ready to do. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's augmented by the right stuff to kind of make up for it. But I think this is definitely an example where it's not quite holding up. And I don't know that it held up at the time either, but it is definitely stands out to me watching this, where I was like, this was a choice.
Yeah, we do get a few shots of this thing, specifically on the train while they're escaping, like when they're shooting it, where they clearly made a practical one. Like, there's definitely some shots where it's practical and it's gooey and gross and they shoot it. Wish we had a few more of those shots, but the thing does look appropriately gnarly and gross for a few of those close-ups. I think the dogs look pretty good. Those are clearly just dogs in, like, a bloody suit or whatever.
Yeah, something, yeah.
It looks gross. It looks good. I'm glad they went practical with that route. And then, finally, Andrew, just to cap off this film here, it ends... For one, it's a very bleak ending, which I like in my zombie movies. It's pretty hard to be hopeful at the end of these, so I like when they lean into it. And just when you think they've escaped, the two of them, new team of doctors, scientists, researchers show up. They capture them. You hear someone say the Nemesis Project, which is a reference to Resident Evil 3. He's hauled off. She goes under and wakes up on I would say in a hospital, but I guess it is in a hospital, but clearly not just like in a patient room, clearly like in we're doing experiments on your room. Mila Jovovich, that is, she wakes up wearing a paper dress and escapes the hospital and sees that Raccoon City is...
Paper dress is being extremely generous to what she's wearing in this sequence.
A piece of paper worn as a dress. How about
yes,
that?
Yes, that's a little bit more apt.
Formative, y'all, I'm telling you. But she goes out, and Raccoon City is like a wasteland. Like, clearly, there's a full-on zombie apocalypse happening. There's abandoned cars. There's trash everywhere. Big, huge tease for the sequel. And I think it's a pretty good tease, especially, I will say, as a fan of the video games, even. The first video game takes place in a mansion, and then Resident Evil 2 takes place in the city. And just that feeling of being like, whoa, it's going to be like an entire city was huge. So, like, seeing the movies kind of do the same progression, like how do you up the ante while we go from one location to an entire city, It's a pretty good tease. She cocks the shotgun. We're ready for more.
No notes.
Andrew, I gotta admit, this was my first time revisiting this movie in gotta be 20 years. Even though I saw it so many times, I hadn't seen it in a very long time. I think I appreciate a lot of things I was unable to appreciate back then. Overall, I think my overall thoughts on the movie haven't changed that much, but there's this, Andrew, there's this sick part of me. I kind of want to watch all these movies now. I kind of want to know where they go with this, how they extend this for so long. I'm sure I will get angry about a lot of things because I do know they eventually incorporate tons of characters from the video games, but in vastly different ways. So it will undoubtedly get under my skin, but curiosity. I think it's going to carry me to watch these things.
We'll see.
I don't think you'll be doing the same. That's fine. But what I will encourage you to do, Andrew, is play some of these games. You said you own Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Top 5. I think you'll love it. And it's nothing like this movie. So there's
Good.
that. But I want you to appreciate just the wild difference between the two. Definitely think you should check that out. But Andrew, for now, it's time for our question of the week. And if you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can do just that. Hop into our Discord. There's a link in the show notes. This week we have a question from Flamin' Queso, who asks, the red box outside of my grocery store has finally gone away, and it feels like the end of an era. What is your favorite memory that involves Redbox? No Blockbuster stories. I love this question, Queso.
First off, buddy, don't tell me what to do. But
I will tell a Hollywood video story, and you will like it.
I have. I will say that this, not a Redbox story, but I'm going to start this, and then we can tell Redbox stories. I was driving through Indiana because that's where I went to get the Oppenheimer Steelbook. Because in Illinois, you can get to Indiana in like 20 minutes.
So you drove to another state to get this movie on Steelbook.
Yeah, but the distance I drove to get it would be less than you driving across the city of Houston.
But it's more it's a more fun way to express it by saying you drove to another state for a Steelbook.
Anyway, I did. So I got that Steelbook. While I was in Indiana, I decided I would get some Tasty Cakes because my dad likes Tasty Cakes, and I like Tasty Cakes. They're a Hostess-esque snack cake. They're a whole brand. There's a whole bunch of stuff.
Are they not in Illinois?
They're not. But
weird.
Very weird.
We have those here now, by the way.
Illinois?
Houston. Yeah, we have Illinois here. Now we have Tasty Cakes in our grocery stores here.
Cool. My dad's probably really happy he doesn't have to import them from Pennsylvania anymore. But I was driving by, and I drove by a shopping center, and I was so taken by what this shopping center must have been at its peak that I drove back and took a picture of it. And I don't think I ever posted or anything, but it was a closed down Family Video right next to a Marco's Pizza. And I was like, man, like there was a time that, this parking lot was packed full every Friday and Saturday night. Every Friday, Saturday night. It's overflowing. I guarantee you there were people waiting for parking spots, parking on the street, wherever. Just grab a couple of flicks, candy, grab your pizza, go home, watch your movies. Like I know. And so like I sat in that parking lot and like I took a couple of pictures of the signs in the shopping center and everything. And I genuinely just kind of sat there for a second and was like, we've talked a lot on this show endlessly about how the experience has suffered. And in that moment, I was like, man, I don't know if I've ever felt that statement harder than I did in that moment. The pizza place, to its credit, is still open. So people are still going to get the pizza. But I was like, man, that was the place.
Dude, movie and pizza, that's an event, right? Oh, I got a friend coming over. Mom, drive us to Blockbuster. Let's pick out a game and a movie. And like, that's our
Even
night.
if it's not a friend, it's your family. Just your family grabbing a pizza and some movies.
Totally.
Like, just, it's so... strange to think about because again, also it's just not like that anymore. It is the experience has suffered, but it is, I mean, it is what it is now. But
Redbox is such a specific era.
yes.
I'll be honest. I don't have. I was ride or die with movie rental places literally until they shut down. I think I've told the story, but like Hollywood Video was my place of choice, and by the end they did have a I think like a monthly subscription model, and you could rent as many movies as you want. You could have like 3 at a time, something like that. But I physically went to a store and rented my movies until they shut down. And then I think I finally went to Netflix disc in the mail service. Redbox, I mean, I've used a couple times. Usually they have coupons sometimes. They get a free rental. I'll use them. But I never trusted that my disc would work. There's not a lot of quality control of those discs. And my family used it a lot. At the time, my mom and stepdad traveled a lot. It's cool. You could rent it and drop it off at any Redbox. So I think that was convenient for them. Although I do remember this movie. I don't remember what movie it was, but it was in their trunk for months until they probably paid like $40 for it. Like, I don't know how they even. I think eventually they cut you off. They just charge you something big and you keep the disc. So I think they paid a lot of money for 1 or 2 movies that never got returned. That's the biggest thing I think of when I think of Redbox. I still see them. There's a Walgreens right by my house that has like it's 2 red boxes like connected. So those aren't completely gone yet, but it sounds like they might be on their way out if Queso had one picked up from his grocery store.
I would imagine. Well, I'd be curious what the cost structure is for something like that. Like, do you know what are the sales? How are those split? Like, what does it cost the place to have it outside? So I
remember commercials for like looking for investors, like invest in one of our machines. Like, you like. I don't know if they're franchised. Like, I don't know if you own it or you rent them. I don't know what the investment.
Yeah, I don't actually know how it works. Or like
for it.
If because you probably need permission to put it there, but you would then assume that like the Walgreens gets a cut or something because it's outside their store.
Yeah, they lease the space or whatever.
Yeah, and so I don't know how it works, but I would imagine at some places it might not be profitable anymore. So you just get rid of them because you're not making any money off of it. But it is interesting. I had an ex that did Redbox a lot. Like, she would be like, "Hey, or I'm gonna go get some banh mi sandwiches and hit the Redbox," and I was like, "All right, cool. What's a banh mi?" But
dude, banh mi and Redbox is the new pizza
Netflix and chill. It's the stage. It's the stage
one
right
in
before
between,
Netflix and chill. So we did that for a while. Like, so we would because it was just easy because this was probably 2012, 13. Video stores had largely disappeared from the city of Houston as far as like being viable things or things that there were a bunch of. So it was an easy thing to do for a while there if there was movies, especially new movies you wanted to watch because streaming hadn't quite gotten to its, hey, we'll put new movies up 6 weeks after they come out, stuff like that. This is kind of right on the cusp of that big streaming thing breaking out. And so yeah, I have some decent memories of getting some games and some movies from Redbox just because that was a new, relatively easy way to, while you were out grabbing dinner or something, you can just stop by and grab some Redbox. And yeah, so I've got a couple of good memories there, but it's largely, I remember mostly the video stores themselves. That's largely where most of my memories reside. Like I remember, he didn't want, Blockbuster stories, so never mind, I won't tell them.
The question is, Andrew, have you had a banh mi sandwich now? Have you had some banh mi?
Yeah.
Vietnamese sandwich?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good.
All right, just wanted to make sure.
It's good.
You sounded very unsure about her
at the
getting
time.
banh mi,
At the time, I had no idea really what it was because I went to college in Huntsville, where Huntsville didn't even have a Chinese restaurant. So, how are you supposed to get culture in a place like Huntsville, Texas? That was the thing. It was like, I'm gonna get some banh mi, and I was like, what is that? And she's like, it's a Vietnamese sandwich, and I was like, what's on it? She's like, sauce, some meat, some veggies and stuff. I was like, So it's just a sandwich. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, all right, cool. Let's go get some sandwiches.
You just said that.
Just say it's sandwiches.
If you got any Redbox stories, we of course want to hear them. Have you seen any Redboxes get picked up? Are they on the way out? I'm kind of curious.
Have you robbed them yourself?
Coming to an end. Yeah. Have you kept a Redbox disc? Or Andrew, I don't know if we can talk about this on mic, but you and I are both really into like building a Plex library. I mean, that's a gold mine
I'm just
there,
gonna
right?
say it. I'm just gonna say it. When Netflix first introduced the mail-in program, I was doing 3 discs a week, and I was ripping those discs to my computer immediately and sending them back and getting myself upwards of 6 movies a week. And I would burn them to my computer. I would burn them to a new disc, and then I would delete them off my computer. And you know what, folks? Don't do that now. Like, if you have the means to support these things, you should. If you don't, it's a couple of bucks to stream stuff. I don't suggest doing what I did. Also, the quality really suffered because I only had a single layer DVD burner, and a lot of these things were dual layer discs. It's like I remember this is also dating myself. I remember doing Degrassi. I had a lot of Degrassi seasons. And
Okay.
The Next Generation, not the original Degrassi. And I took one of the discs, I burned it, I ripped it, and I had I don't even remember what the program was, but and then it burned it to the disc, and it was like, hey, by the way, you're taking this and burning it just to the disc. The quality is going to suffer. And I was like, yeah, no, what's the worst that could happen? And then I watched it, and I was like, oh, I can't even see this. It's so bad. Like it's that it was that kind of thing. So I was like, oops, oh well. But yeah, Netflix or Redbox, I'm sure was exactly the same. You used to be able to do this with computer games. Like I was actually reading a thread on Reddit where somebody talked about back when computer games on disc were coming out. You could copy those discs because there was almost no copyright protection on it.
Yeah, just pass them around to your friend. Yeah,
but
100%.
Not even that, but you could take the disc, put it into your computer, grab the data, put it on a new disc, physically go return the game, and nobody was any the wiser. The guy mentioned telling that story to his parents, and his parents were horrified that he was doing this, and he didn't understand what he was doing wrong. He thought he was legitimately using the system properly as a teenager / child. And I was like, I don't know that I believe that, man. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't do it anymore genuinely because I can just buy things. But there was a time where I was at college living in a dorm and getting 3 Netflix things to my dorm every day, or twice a week or something. And I was like, this is what I do now.
Well, Andrew, you wouldn't download a car, would you?
Yes, I would.
All right. Next week, our next movie up is Silent Hill. So it's another adaptation of a long-running horror franchise. This, however, is a video game franchise I have never played, despite loving Resident Evil. Never played the games, never seen the movies. This will be a first for me. Come back next week for Silent Hill. And until then, just remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
I feel like I've been able to, over the years, accomplish and have a knack for figuring out what notes and what melodies create what sort of moods. And I'm a big fan of also what frequencies do to people, much like when a dog hears a high frequency that we don't hear. there are similar things that can be done to human beings as well. And sometimes people won't know why they feel the way they do when they hear my stuff. And if it gives them, some sort of intestinal problems, that could be my fault as well.
I can't stand anything about that statement you just said, and it sounds horrible to me.